Hey Covalence friends. So in this over-engineered grocery list saga, we last left off creating a controller for our registration and our login logic, and now we need to implement some token parsing and validation. So let's go ahead and jump right into that. So I'm going to go ahead and create a middleware here. Let's see. I'll call that validate token. We're going to import the JSON web token library here. We're going to import our config for that. So forget what I named the export. So I'll just go ahead and go down our configuration tree here and let it autocomplete for me. Token config. Perfect. All right. I also need to import the request handler type from Express. And let's go ahead and get started. And I'll name this isValidUser. Yeah, we'll go with that. If I want to do some additional custom functionality beyond this, I can. But for now, I'll just validate that the token is good, it's unexpired, it's got the correct signature. So let's go ahead and do that. Now by typing the entire function expression as a request handler, that means we have the express request, response, and next object automatically typed. So if I hover over req_res_next, they have the respective express request, express response, and express next function types automatically applied. So if you haven't used that before, excuse me, it just saves you a little bit of typing doing that. So I always like doing that. All right. So we have the request headers coming in. That should have the bearer token within it. So we've got some validation we need to do, and we have some extraction we need to do. So let's go ahead and check and make sure that we at least have authorization headers. So and if we are missing the auth headers, let's go ahead and return a response. And I'll go ahead and say 400 for this, just saying it's a badly formatted request because we're missing some crucial information, the auth headers. All right, beyond that, auth headers we should expect to be a string with bearer and then, the token itself. So what I want to do is I want to split this string on an empty space. That should give us the string bearer and the string of the token itself respectively. So we'll split it up, and just because we're over engineering it, we'll check and make sure it's a valid bearer token as well. So why not? So we'll go ahead and array to structure type and token, and then we'll go ahead and validate those. So I'll say if not type or not token, so if either of those are missing, or if type to lowercase doesn't equal bearer. And here for this message, I'm going to send up, I'll say, the auth headers are incorrectly formatted. We'll go with that. Let me go ahead and clean this up a little bit. I'll go ahead and throw up some curly braces and knock this down here just for consistency in code style. All right, so beyond this, we know that we at least have something truthy like the token exists, but we need to actually go ahead and validate it here. So let's go ahead and set up a try catch block. And we're going to be doing the only thing we're going to be doing in this try block is validating the token. So if any error is thrown, it's from the JSON web token library, and that error is going to be due to some validation issue. So I will send a 401 for this status code because everything has been like formatted okay as far as like the auth header itself goes beyond this point, and now this is something directly wrong with the token. So this will be anything like the token's expired, it's not a JWT, period, it's a valid format, but it's got an invalid signature because somebody's trying to, craft their own and be, crafty. So I'll just dump out the error.message here. So with TypeScript and JavaScript's error object, it's a little kind of frustrating at times because you don't only explicitly have errors thrown, you can throw any data type. So error is really kind of a nebulous like structure, and in order to get something actually typed as an error object, I've got to cast it to unknown first and then to error. And then here I can safely reference error.message. And you can kind of relax your TS config to be a little more forgiving for catch blocks, but this also keeps me like cognizant of what I should do. Like I probably should check to see, if message in error. And that would let me validate that the message property exists in the error object. And only then should I, do this, because otherwise I would have like error while validating the token undefined. But if I'm only writing one line of code that can't throw an error here, we kind of know what it's gonna be. So all right, so we're gonna use jwt.verify. So this does two things for us. Let me call it payload. The JWT verify function, well, as the name suggests, verifies that the token's good for all the reasons that I mentioned above, and it will also return the payload to you. So I've got it saved as this variable payload. And here, I'm going to go ahead and provide my token config.key. And let's see, I want to go adjust my config here quickly so I don't have to, keep doing a non-null assertion. In the event I can't sign my tokens because that environment variable doesn't exist, I want to crash my server. So we will shut everything down, just kind of nuke it from orbit in the event that that environment variable is not defined. So that should get picked up on by TypeScript, and it will infer that this can only be a string, because if its only possible values are undefined or a string, and we just did a truthiness check for it, it can only be a string now. And let me go pull in my payload type. But you know, once we get to this line of code, we have safely validated that the token is good itself, and we can trust the contents of what's in payload. And all I want to do is inject the payload contents into a property on the express request. And I mean, I'm just going to do request.user, keep it nice and standard. But this does allow me to have anything sitting behind the isValidUser middleware safely utilize this data. So if in any random middleware that I want to, or any random express request that I want to validate, as long as it sits behind isValidUser, if it can get to the controller itself, that means that it was able to iterate through everything successfully in this process. So now I do have to tell TypeScript that yes, this is okay to do. The express request itself does have a property on it called user now, and that user has that interface has the value of payload here. And right after we inject that data into the rec.user property, we'll call the next function, allowing us to go to the next request handler in line. So I'll go ahead and export this, and let me go back to my type so I can adjust the express request interface. And so just so I don't have to create my own request user interface that extends upon a bunch of express stuff that I have to use and type on every single express request, I don't want to do that. So I'll go ahead and declare a global type here under the express namespace for the request interface. And we'll give it a property called user, whose type is of the payload interface. So now express everywhere I use it. The rec.user is going to be of this interface's structure, so I can reference rec.user.id. So we've got this beautiful single source of truth, and I know I'm keeping it very simple with this ID for now, but that means we've got some beautiful IntelliSense everywhere. And now we are satisfied with rec.user equals payload here, because Express understands that, well, this is an interface that actually does exist now. So all right. And now that we've got this middleware defined, we can start kind of piecing some stuff together. So I know I don't have anything defined API-wise, but we can go ahead and get some fake-ish routes going in place. So I'll create an index router. I'll create an API folder. I'll create an auth folder. And for the auth folder, I'll go ahead and get that started. So we're leading up to auth, so I'll go ahead and get these controllers imported in here. Let me make a little index here to daisy chain everything, just to make it a little more convenient, especially for when we get to creating some actual API routes. So did I make those named exports? Oh, I guess so. Okay. Alright, so I'm just doing this to simplify my imports. So instead of having to do two separate imports, I can import one default object with both of those controllers underneath it, which is kind of like silly for, just this small auth controller folder, but it'll expand and scale a lot more nicely with the API folders themselves. So so that ends up looking quite nice. We've got all of our business logic tucked away in here. Let's see, and I did make these just simple request handlers. So I actually need to change these from router.use to router.post. So we're only matching post requests with these paths. Okay, but we have our login and registration routes defined and set up. I'll go ahead and make an index router here for our API. And this is just so I have something importable and exportable to be used elsewhere, just so I have something set up. Now in our routes folder index, I can go ahead and link to the API folder and the auth folder both. So and in addition to Express, our two subrouters, I'm also going to import our isValidUser middleware from our middlewares. So alright, create a new router here, export that. So for our API routes, it's just an empty index router at the moment, but it's still, like I said, something exportable that I can import and utilize. Alright, and here we'll go ahead and slap on the middleware for API router. So we'll assume temporarily at least that everything involving the API router I want to be authenticated for. We have no public routes, so everybody must be logged in. So all we have to do is slap on isValidUser there, and everywhere in any of our API routes we can use rec.user.id because we'll know who the user was that made the request. So that gets our middlewares set up. So just looking at kind of a high-level overview of what we've accomplished in this video is outside of the controllers, we really just went to the middlewares and we did some validation on the request coming in for the auth headers, just making sure that we at least have auth headers, they're in the right format, we have the right type of auth header, and then after we've validated all of that, we use the JSON Web Token library to validate our token and make sure that, well, it's good. It's not the word pizza, it is actually a JWT. It's not expired, it has the correct signature, so nobody's trying to spoof their credentials. And once that's accomplished, we can inject that into our new property on the express request user. So the request user is now going to be whatever we extracted out of the token itself. And then we call the next function. So whatever sits behind isValidUser now has the ability to reference rec.user. Whatever is in the payload, which for now is just ID. So by doing this, we now have the ability to apply that middleware on the entirety of the API routes themselves. So as long as anything sits behind this middleware, we know who made the request itself. So we're starting to get into some more exciting territory because we actually have like a router tree set up for some auth routes. So I can actually start making some user accounts, and then very shortly we'll be able to start implementing some stuff on the API itself, at which point we'll have real test data to work with. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this thus far. And as with the previous videos, if you have some commentary or questions, or just any general, comments you'd like to leave about the direction of the series or some features you'd like to see, please let me know. But otherwise, like, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next edition.